You are standing over someone you loved. The casket is closed. The room smells of flowers that no one asked for. Your hands don't know what to do with themselves, so you clasp them together, and you stand there in that specific stillness that only grief produces. The stillness of a body that has forgotten what it is supposed to do next. You have been taught, in some quiet way you cannot name, how to behave in this moment. You wear dark colors, you speak in a lower register, you do not laugh. And somewhere underneath all of that learned behavior, something much older is moving. It has been moving for at least 300,000 years. In 2021, archaeologist Paul Pettit at Durham University published a comprehensive analysis of mortuary behavior across early Homo sapiens sites spanning 5 continents. What he found was not what most researchers expected. Early humans did not simply discard their dead. They carried them, they arranged them. They returned to the same places across generations to be near them. The earliest confirmed intentional burial site, discovered in the Rising Star Cave System in South Africa, contains the remains of Homo naledi, a species with a brain roughly 1/3 the size of yours, deliberately placed in a chamber so deep and so difficult to reach that researchers needed to be slender enough to fit through a 7.5-inch passage just to study them. Homo naledi had a brain too small, scientists once assumed, to process something as complex as loss. That assumption was wrong. What this means for you, standing in that room with your hands clasped, is something no eulogy will say out loud. Your grief is not a modern invention. It is not a cultural performance. It is not something civilization taught you. It is something so old it predates language, predates religion, predates the concept of a soul. It was already there before anyone had words for it. In 1908, a burial was uncovered at La Chapelle aux Saints in southwestern France. Inside, the skeleton of a Neanderthal man, later estimated to be between 40 and 50 years old at time of death, was found lying in a deliberately excavated pit, positioned in a fetal curve, with animal bones and flint tools placed near his body. He had lost most of his teeth years before he died. His bones showed severe arthritis. He could not have survived alone, which means someone fed him, someone stayed near him. Someone, when he died, dug a hole in the earth and placed him in it with care. Researchers at the Natural History Museum of Paris, who re-examined the site in 2013, confirmed that the pit was intentional, not natural erosion. Someone chose to do this. Someone, 50,000 years ago, felt something when this man stopped breathing. And here is where it gets disturbing. We have spent centuries telling ourselves a story about ancient humans and grief. The story goes like this. They were too primitive to truly mourn. Death, for them, was a biological event, brutal, frequent, unremarkable. Grief, in this story, is something that came later. Something that required civilization, philosophy, religion, time. We told ourselves that the depth of our mourning is what separates us from them. In 1995, biological anthropologist Barbara King at the College of William and Mary began a decades-long study of grief responses across species: chimpanzees, elephants, dolphins, corvids, and early hominid burial evidence. Her findings, consolidated in her 2013 book, How Animals Grieve, demonstrated that grief does not require language, abstract thought, or religion. It requires only one thing: attachment. When attachment is formed, its rupture produces a physiological and behavioral response that is consistent across species and across time. King identified this response: the searching, the stillness, the return to the place of the lost, in burial sites as old as 100,000 years. The behaviors were not random. They were patterned. They were intentional. They were grief. The depth of your mourning is not what separates you from them. It is what connects you. In 2018, paleoanthropologist Francesco De Rico at the University of Bordeaux analyzed ochre markings and shell ornaments found at Blombos Cave in South Africa, dated to approximately 75,000 years ago. Some of these objects, small perforated shells strung together, were found in burial contexts. They were not food. They were not tools. They had no survival function. They were placed with the dead because they meant something to the living. Jericho's analysis suggested these were personal objects, things that had belonged to the person who died, or things that expressed something about who that person was. The living were not just disposing of a body. They were marking a life. They were saying this person existed, and their existence mattered, and we are not ready to let it become nothing. You have done this too. You have kept something that belonged to someone who is gone. A watch, a piece of clothing, still folded the way they folded it. A phone number you never deleted, not because you forgot, but because deleting it felt like something final you were not prepared to do. You did not learn this from a culture or a religion or a grief counselor. This impulse to hold on to the physical trace of a person is 75,000 years old. It arrived in you already assembled. What no one expected was this. In 2023, a research team led by Lee Berger at the Wits University Evolutionary Studies Institute reanalyzed the Rising Star Cave complex in South Africa. They found that the burial chambers of Homo naledi, that small-brained species with no known language and no confirmed symbolic thought, contained engraved markings on the walls near the burials. Crosshatches. Geometric lines, not accidental, deliberate. The team's peer-reviewed findings published in eLife suggested that Homo naledi was not simply hiding its dead. It was doing something around its dead, something that looked across 300,000 years of distance, like ritual, like ceremony, like the need to make the moment mean something. Berger described it as evidence that the roots of mortuary behavior may be far deeper and far less dependent on cognitive complexity than the entire field had previously believed. The grief you feel is not a product of your intelligence. It is older than intelligence. And so the story we told ourselves, that grief is what civilized humans do, that our mourning is sophisticated and theirs was blunt, that we invented the meaning of death, that story is not history. It is comfort. We told it to ourselves because it made our loss feel like a privilege. It made the weight of grief feel like proof of how far we had come. But 300,000 years of evidence says something quieter and harder. Grief did not arrive when civilization did. It arrived when attachment did. And attachment arrived long before the first city, the first God, the first word spoken out loud. It arrived when one living thing became important to another living thing, and the second thing died, and the first thing stood in the silence that followed and did not know what to do with its hands. You already know what that silence feels like. Now look at your phone, the one in your pocket or face down on the table next to you. Inside it, there are messages you have not answered. There are photographs stored automatically, without your permission. Images of people, of moments, of days that felt ordinary when they happened. The phone remembers everything. It does not know how to forget. It does not know what death means. When someone you love dies, their contact stays in your phone, and for a long time you do not delete it, and sometimes you scroll past it in the dark, and your thumb hovers, and you keep scrolling. An ancient human placed a shell near a body in a cave because they could not let a person become nothing. You keep a name in a phone for the same reason. What changed was not the feeling. What changed was only the object that holds it. And somewhere in that exchange, the shell for the phone, the cave for the contacts list, the ochre marking for the photograph, something was lost. Not grief itself, grief survived. What was lost was the knowledge that every human being who ever lived has stood in that specific stillness with their hands not knowing what to do, and felt exactly what you feel now. You were never the first. You were never alone in this. You just forgot.